Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today is the day for those favorite of undersung heroes in the Imperium, the Militia, and we are going to tell you about 4 lists that you can use to pair famous interactions between mortals and those gods, the Legiones Astartes, straight from the Horus Heresy lore. This is an idea that I first discussed, I think, back when I was doing a review of the Provenances that are unique to Militia. These are special rules that are opened by your force commander that give you unique ways to adjust the way the Militia PDF plays. I absolutely love the concept of this. I love the fact that there are so many different options that combine in so many different ways. And maybe the most important thing for overall balance of the game is that all of them are pretty cool, but not a lot of them really seem broken in any regards. One of the things that we've seen among the non-Legiones Astartes forces, and some things that people have definitely had legitimate complaints about, is there's a bit of a wonder if everything that isn't Space Marines is intended to be balanced as just not quite as good as Space Marines. I saw it from my friends who played Solorox, my friends who played Mechanicum, and while I do think that both of those armies have strong builds that are pretty good, there's definitely something to be said for the fact that there are big weaknesses in both of those lists that are just easily overclassed by the Space Marines, and the Militia are no different. What's really interesting, though, is that I feel like the use of the Provenances has really pushed this whole army into a really cool lore space, where if you want to be a full Militia player, then you can do so, and you can come up with a really cool story for the world upon which these forces were first drawn, how, among the thousands of worlds in the Imperium, you have like all these different diverse and strange combinations of cultures and history that can result in your army being the way you want it to be. Or, like I appreciate, I think that Militia makes a really good pairing with the Space Marines as a way of representing some of those Crusade moments or those Heresy moments where the human auxilia is working right alongside the bioengineered gods of the Emperor. Before we get into it, though, first of all, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you listening to the channel, supporting this, especially as I try to delve deeper into the idea of making the rules fit the lore in a way that's satisfying for both you and your opponent. Please like if you're interested in the video, please subscribe, share it with your friends, and of course, if you'd be so kind, support the channel with a tip, which is on the link below. And later on in this video, you're going to hear poor starved Hazel just knocking her bowl around all over the place as she begs passive-aggressively for treats. Help Hazel, she's hungry. Thanks so much. So anyway, like I said, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be taking a look at 4 specific moments in the Horus Heresy lore, and maybe bending things a little bit, but trying to find a way to represent those forces, those pairings on the tabletop. The first thing we're going to talk about is one that is near and dear, close to my heart as a White Scars player, and this is a moment from the remainders of the Defenders of Terra and the Khan himself as he mounts an all-out epic attack to retake the Lion's Gate spaceport. Now, this can be found, and you can read about this, in Warhawk, which is book 6 of the Siege of Terra series, and it's an absolutely awesome moment. So the image from the text involves the Khan putting together a surprise attack against the Lion's Gate with basically every vehicle that is available. They're getting a hold of every Solar Auxilia, Layman Russ, every tank, every heavy weapons platform, every Shadow Sword, Bane Blade, whatever they can. And everyone's just flying as quickly as they can, just crossing open space and trying to make it to take on and fight off the Death Guard before the traitors have a chance to do something about it. So obviously speed is an element, and transports are also going to be important for this list. Starting off with the Allied Detachment, we are going to be using Survivors of the Dark Age and Industrial Stronghold as our 2 provenances. So Survivors of the Dark Age is going to allow us to have our Imperialis Militia Grenadier squads and our Militia Command Cadres to take either a Rhino, a Termite, or a Landraider Proteus carrier as a dedicated transport, so long as they're 10 or less. They cost the same as they do for a Legiones Astartes army, but they have Ballistic Skill 3, and they also have the 3rd line subtype, so they're going to be considerably less durable. Now, this is also the province where you can take void jumpers, but we're going to ignore that entirely. It doesn't show up in the lore here, and it's not particularly relevant. The next one we're going to be taking is Industrial Stronghold, and this is going to be important because it allows us to take up to 2 additional heavy support choices, which must be Imperialis, Militia, Layman Russ units. Each of these, then, choices can also be squadroned, as opposed to just being one single tank. You can have up to 6 Layman Russes in the same slot, which is pretty cool, and it's going to be important for the amount of tanks we're trying to take. The biggest thing here, of course, is the fact that in a standard allied detachment, you can only take 1 heavy support choice, and normally for a militia player, 1 heavy support choice, you could have 1 Layman Russ. But this will allow us to take up to, theoretically, 18 Layman Russ tanks. We don't have the points for it, and we're not going to do it, but the ability to take 3 times 6 Layman Russes, I mean, it gives you a lot of options. Like I said, we're not going to get there, but it does allow us to represent that a little bit better on the field. Now, you do not have to take Survivors of the Dark Age. I should point out, Survivors of the Dark Age really, and in this list, I'm not really using it much to its advantage, because we're trying to save points for White Scars. You could realistically drop Survivors of the Dark Age and add almost anything here. You could do Warrior Elite, you could add, Veterans of the Great Crusade or something. Anyway, so here's the list I have. We're going to start off with a Force Commander. The Force Commander is going to be given a Cyber Familiar, Last Pistol, on foot. I'm giving him Power Armor, and a Iron Halo as well, really kitting them out. They are going to be accompanied by a retinue, a Command Cadre, and I left some openings here. It really doesn't matter a lot, just to put a couple special weapons in there and make sure that they get a banner. There's also going to just be a lone troops choice, and this is going to be a standard infantry squad. I'm going to go ahead and give them crack grenades so that they can hug to death a vehicle if they manage to make it that far. And that squad is going to be put into a cargo 8-hauler. I guess I should say that the Force Commander is going to be in a Rhino with his buddies. You can retweak this. You can drop a few points off the White Scar side if you want to try to put them into a Landraider instead, for example, which would be pretty cool, but I didn't go ahead that way. On top of that, then, I have 3 Layman Russes. And basically all of them, the one thing that the list is pretty short on is anti-tank. And the Layman Russes actually have a pretty great ability to upgrade into the Vanquisher Battle Cannon and a coaxial mounted autocannon for real cheap. And so you can give them a Dozer Blade and that upgrade, and they end up being 130 points, which is pretty nice. You can also give them pintle-mounted weapons if you have extra points, if you're interested in that. But keeping them real cheap for the points and having 3 of them in similar ways than that, it does give you 6 additional shots at strength 9 AP 2, and with brutal as well if you're trying to kill infantry that's particularly tough. But that gives you 5 transport vehicles on the militia side to race alongside the White Scars, which is pretty great. Now we're going with the Chagorian Brotherhood for the White Scars portion of this list, and we're going to be have a couple of HQs. We're going to have a Chaplain and a Stormseer, both of them mounted on bikes. I went ahead and chose to give my Chaplain a Thunderhammer, and I went ahead and gave my Centurion a Force Weapon. Both of them also have Cyberhawks, which is going to be important because those are special war gear that White Scars have to help make charges even easier, which is going to be important in a second. We have 2 maxed out Golden Keshig squads of 6 bikes. We didn't go ahead and give them any additional weapons, so they're just going to be relying on their power lances, but that's okay, because there's some other stuff to help back them up. There will be 3 7-man Skyhunter bike squads. All of these are going to be full of Volkite. This means that before you take casualties, you'll be shooting 105 Volkite shots at strength 6 AP 5 with Deflagrate at a 45-inch range against your opponent. You're going to be mounted on a pretty sweet mobile platform to allow you to jump in, around, on top of cover, etc., to line up those shots and take out infantry. It's going to look pretty sweet. And then, of course, you have the big boy himself, because he's part of the story, Jagatai Khan, and we are putting him on his Sojutsu pattern Void Bike. It's only 25 points, and he's the only Primarch who can take a mounted weapon option, or a mounted option like that, so of course you're going to take it. So you're going to be fast, fast, fast. Now, this is not going to be a cheap list to build. we're looking at 33 jet bikes, plus the Khan himself, and then you got to buy a couple tanks or whatever, but it is a totally, I think, lore acceptable way to play off this battle. It's really unfortunate that, there's some things that are mentioned in the lore that just are not going to be practical, like including a whole bunch of Bane Blades and Shadow Swords and the like. Those rules for those models do exist, but because of the restrictions on the Lords of War, you can either take the Khan or one of those things, and I think definitely the Khan is the better choice here, both for flavor and whatever. So, the Khan rides out to face his punk brother Mortarion with his militia buddies in tow. I absolutely love this list, and some variation of it would be a lot of fun to play someday. The variation, as I described it here, I had it written down at about 2850 points, so there's definitely some room to add new things if you wish, change some things up if you want to as well, but pretty close to a full pointed list at 3k if that is the sort of thing you're aiming for. Next, we're going to take a walk on the dark side and talk about another Siege of Terra really awesome moment, and we are going to talk about the Beastmen Assault in Book 2 of Siege of Terra, where those poor ab humans who were basically just dogged on. That was definitely an unintentional pun about dogging. You get the idea. They actually do, and this is sidebar, of course, they actually do a pretty good job, especially early in the Siege books, I think, of pointing out just how terrible things are for the non-superhuman Imperial troops and the essentially metahuman Imperial citizenry. Normal people's lives suck. The militia, they get uprooted and they get shoved up anywhere. The abhumans, who just, for most of them, just had the misfortune to be born on a world with abnormal radiation and are shunned by a extremely xenophobic society. Like, what other option do they have in their minds anyway? They've been thrown away by the Imperium, and they're offered some sort of support by the War Master, so it makes sense that they end up in this terrible spot. But we get to see some of these poor souls running at, charging at, and losing themselves in the bloodlust as they attempt to attack the Siege of Terra. So for this list, we are going to be using Feral Warriors, and we're also going to be using Abhuman Muster, and that's going to give us a whole bunch of stat changes and variations on this list. We're going to be getting, all told, +1 strength and -1 ballistic skill, +1 weapon skill when charging, in addition to being bulky, and also we're going to have Hammer of Wrath for our characters, and a Hammer of Wrath 2 for our independent characters. There are some restrictions on this, in which you must charge if you're within 12 inches. Not really a big deal, because that's what we're going to be trying to do anyway, just running forward and charge, clearing screens, dogging up units, taking up space. The last thing, the most important thing, is that for a small price, you can upgrade anything with a close combat weapon to a chain axe, which is nuts. Shred and a +1 strength is absolutely nuts. And you might be asking, okay, who are we going to be putting those chain axes on? Yep, we're putting them on everyone. Absolutely everyone in the list that I'm about to share, I went ahead and paid specifically for the chain axe. Except for, actually, that's not true, I'm a liar, not the Force Commander. So the Allied Detachment here, there is a Force Commander. I went ahead and actually mounted the Force Commander, put him on a steed, made him cavalry. He's got Carapace armor and Iron Halo, Cyber Familiar, and I've given him a Militia Lance alongside with actually a Power Fist. There are 4 Militia Squads. They all have close combat weapons, the chain axes, and they've all got crack grenades. And then I've got 10 Cavalrymen with Militia Lances and Carapace armor as well. So, I mean, it's not specifically, this is not exactly lore-friendly, specifically the cavalry as part of this charge. However, I think it makes sense to make the leader someone who moves a little bit faster, a little bit quicker. The combination here, the Feral Warriors actually, the +1 to charge is actually really, really great, especially on the cavalry. The cavalry get these really cool lances, and the biggest problem with everything in this list is weapon skill 3. So, like, getting up to weapon skill 4, so you've at least got a shot at hitting 50-50 on all the weapon skill 4 stuff in the game, is really, really great. And also, it's going to help your leader stand out. So this is 80 infantrymen and 11 horsemen just in this allied detachment. And so then you've got to decide what it goes with as well. I went ahead and chose for this one to pair them with the Iron Warriors. I'm thinking about this is the genius plan of Perturabo as he begins to just try to force the Loyalists to expend resources as much as they can. And so I'm using Hammer of Olympia to represent that. So we're going to have a full selection of HQs. We are going to be led by a Warsmith with the Tyrant of the Dodecathon, and that's the Warlord trait that is going to allow us to weaken one cover or terrain piece on the board, which makes sense considering the theme of what we're after here. They are going to be in a Cataphracti suit, and they're going to be accompanied by a Dominator cohort, which is going to have a whole bunch of... Well, I think it's pretty neat that you can basically just swap out Chain Fists and Thunderhammers here. So a couple of Chain Fists in case you have to carve open some armor, but mostly Thunderhammers so that you can smash away just about everything else in the game. You're also going to have a Siegebreaker and a Master of Signals. I really like including the Master of Signals in an Iron Warriors list. One of the things that's interesting about Hammer of Olympia, and also actually the other specific Rite of War, the Iron Fire, the Iron Warriors specifically have prohibitions on deep strike assaults and stuff like that. So when you bring the Master of Signals, it is for a +1 ballistic skill to one unit, and also just to hate on the special deployment of your opponents by making their special deployments even more likely to mishap as they deploy. So, cold and bitter, perfectly in character for the Iron Warriors. Now, Hammer of Olympia is also the Rite of War that gives special benefits to regular Marines using shrapnel bolters, which are a signature item for the Iron Warriors. We're bringing 2 tactical squads with these, and I do have them in Rhinos with a multi-melta and a dozer blade. Now, I'm not married to this, and actually, I think that I might actually like it better to get rid of these 2 Rhinos and instead use that and a couple of other points here and there to add an additional squad of tactical Marines with the shrapnel bolters. The range on these is only 18 inches for these bolters, but because of Fury of Olympia special rule, you essentially get Fury of the Legion even if you've run, moved, twitched, whatever. You can always just shoot one more time with the shrapnel bolters, and getting to reroll hits of 1 on those shrapnel bolters means with an 18-inch bubble, you can jog your Marines right behind the wall of Beastmen and just try to cause havoc, maybe get a pin off here and there as the Beastmen just rush up the field. So having 10 more infantry to try to cause more pinning checks, I kind of like that idea as well. Regardless if you do that, then the rest of the points are basically in this list consumed by 3 heavy support choices, which should be no surprise to anyone. You're going to have a 6-person Tyrant Siege Terminator squad with all the missiles in the world. You can put the Master of Signals in here, and then you can give this squad a ballistic skill of 5 instead of 4. So now you're starting off with 12 crack missiles around that are hitting on 2s instead of 3s. Because of the Iron Warriors trait, if these are trying to do anything other than kill infantry, they're getting an additional +1 strength. So now they are strength 9 missiles, 2 of them being fired a turn per model and hitting on 2s. Now, if you can position it so that your Siegebreaker is within 6 inches of one of these models as well, you can use the Art of Destruction ability to grant these missiles sunder. So try to think of, anything in the game that can take a look at strength 9 AP 3 shots that hit over 80% of the time and then can also re-roll against armor with the Sunder. It's pretty nuts. It's pretty mad. Now we're also going to have, of course, the Iron Havocs, which are just, the special support upgrade, heavy support squad upgrade for the Iron Warriors. And they're just a heavy support squad that has ballistic skill 5 and also more special rules. So, hilariously this edition, they got this special rule that allows them to have precision shots on a 6+, which is absolutely mad thinking about, so you're going to put these guys with las cannons, and a 7-man squad costs about 300 points. especially considering you're almost definitely going to take an augury scanner so you can react with these guys in the interceptor fire, that means. But I mean, like, if you end up shooting a heavy infantry squad or something like Terminators, then on a 6+ with your precision shots, you can be sniping a warlord or, you know, someone with a special upgrade or a special character, a Primus Medicae, a champion, whatever you want. But regardless, again, these guys are great. They've got last cannon, so they don't need to benefit from the Sunder. They're already ballistic skill 5, so they don't need the augury scanner. They're just nuts. Now, in this list draft, I went ahead and just threw in a Scorpius squadron of 1, because I happen to have 1 of those for the Iron Warriors. You can double that up. You could go to 2 if you wanted to drop points someplace else. You're actually using quite a few points up on your allied detachment. Nearly 1,000 points. So you're kind of stifled a little bit. And some of the units, like the Dominator cohort, plus the Warsmith, that's a lot of points in one bucket for your little small Death Star. But I like having a little bit of stuff like that. Now, you could also play off the Beastmen thing using one of the other legions. I mean, honestly, you could go with almost any of them. You could do the World Eaters, you could do Word Bearers. Sons of Horus, of course, would be an excellent choice as well. But for my money, the idea of all these guys being targeted, manipulated by the War Master and his forces, and then to have them meet their end while they're just backing the Iron Warriors, who probably don't care one little bit if they survive at all, is just, it's very setting and lore appropriate to me. So this next one comes from one of my favorite moments in Book 2, Lost at the Damned, and this is the other side of that, and this involves basically like the point of view of a character like Katsuhiro, who is basically just conscripted and thrown out onto the line, the goal of which is just to put as many soldiers in the way of Horus's war machine as possible early on. But this is, of course, a moment that starts out pretty grim, but ends out pretty fantastic with the arrival of Sanguinius and the Blood Angels against the advice of Rogaldorn. So this is going to be Blood Angels-led force with a supplement or allied detachment of militia, and I actually had kind of a hard time finding the provenances for this. So if I could have a moment to complain just slightly about the militia list, the force commander is required, essentially, as a leader, and it opens up the provenances, which is great, but all the other HQ choices that you have the support squad rule, meaning that, for one, in an allied detachment, you're only ever going to take the force commander, and 2, just in general, it's absolutely, you have to do this, and you have to play the provenances. Now, the provenances are the most unique part of this, and that makes sense, but when we're trying to tailor something specifically to a lore situation, the provenances don't always fit precisely, and this was an example where I kind of felt like it didn't fit super well. So, first off, I was going to do Unending Horde, just the idea of, especially if we're representing that early point in the Siege of Terra, in which this is before all of the soldiers have been depleted through just unbelievably insane levels of warfare and millions of casualties. But instead, I went with something a little bit different. So I chose Warrior Elite and Legacy of the Great Crusade. So this is going to give us Grenadier squads as standard troops, as opposed to the support squad rule, and Levy squads actually gain the support squad rule instead. On top of that, all models have +1 to their leadership, and the Grenadiers are going to get +1 ballistic skill, up to 4, and the Force Commander is going to have an initiative of 5, which doesn't really matter a ton for this. So the idea here for me is the fact that we are going to take advantage of the fact that we're going to have a couple of Grenadier squads showing that there are those veterans in the field, and then we're also going to take 3 Levy squads and do absolutely nothing with them, give them the basic equipment, and that's going to demonstrate or represent our poor conscripts who very bravely, but entirely foolishly and pointlessly almost, are going to stand in the line of fire. So like I said, we're going to have a Force Commander, and you can outfit the Force Commander with what you wish. I chose not to give much to them because I wanted the war gear to reflect sort of the dire nature of what's happening here. So I gave him a power weapon as a symbol of his office, and then I also gave him carapace armor, not power armor, and I did not bother with an iron halo or a cyber familiar. You could definitely, especially if you were going to play this and you wanted to imagine that your force commander, maybe this is imagine a story in which your force commander received that iron halo as a gift from an Astartes that they worked with in the past, or from some fabled campaign, bringing that relic out for one last go. That would be pretty cool. I didn't see the desire for it. No, I do have 2 Grenadier squads, as I said. They are now they have the ability to be compulsory troops. It doesn't really matter though, because I have plenty of troops here. But I went ahead and went with a theme, and I gave 2 of those Grenadiers sniper rifles in both squads. And then I also have, like I said, the 3 squads of levies. And then I also rounded out the allied detachment with a rapier battery with laser destroyers. So my idea here was that essentially this is a group that was set out towards the front line, but by and large this is a scouting force with snipers. This is information gathering, just the barest amount of anti-armor support, something that is just thrown together. Now, the Blood Angels supplement that I'm going with is going to be Day of Revelation, because in the lore, they come from the sky, they drop down. It's so cool, it's so awesome. And I know that some people don't care for the Day of Revelation, but I think that cinematically it matters a lot. So, if you're unfamiliar, basically you just declare a turn in which your deep strike is going to come in, you declare a point where it's going to happen, and this is one of the reasons that people have a problem with, is that smart opponents or shifty opponents can really mess up your deployment because they know where it's going to be. But basically you drop everything you want out of that spot and then go from there. Your compulsory HQ choices must have jump packs, because everybody's coming in this way, and anything that can deep strike has to deep strike with this deep strike assault. On top of that, if there's anything in your detachment that it is not in the deep strike, gain the Fearless special rule until the start of the controlling player's second turn. So to follow along with that sniper theme, and this is just something that I put in there, honestly, just for fun, I'm going to have, of course, all the assault squads and whatever else, but I'm also going to have 1 recon squad and 1 vigilator. And for me, this is a representation of small force commander, of essentially commandos, leading their recon squad out on the fringes, keeping an eye on things, and the human auxilia. And maybe they're the ones that call in the great angel. They're the ones that actually call in for the help. The rest of the list is essentially, I've got a chaplain. You could bring 2 chaplains if you want. There are quite a lot of uses for them, and I think chaplains are a pretty lore-friendly item to use, considering just how concerned we are with the Red Thirst. An apothecary to go along with the Dawnbreaker cohort, the elite jump pack units, and I've given them a mix of their standard Falling Star power spears and then the power blade cases, just for variety and also for, I just think it's good. I also really just like including as many of the Legion-specific units as I can in these lists, so I've also opted for a 5-man Crimson Paladin. I've given an Axe of Perdition to my Sergeant, and I've given Sunset Blades to 2 of the Paladins, and Power Fists on 2 of the others, just for a little bit of variety in the punch. I also went with Axes for Perdition, I think, on both of the Chaplains that I have in this list, but let's keep it in order. 2 Assault Squads as well, and 2 Incandius Contemptor Dreadnoughts just dropping out of the sky. And then of course he's got to be there, Sanguinius himself. The list that I have here, as I've added it up with my choices, I'm adding some extra power weapons on, and Artificer armor on places. This is about a 2,900 point list, and there's definitely things you could tweak, change, add whatever. Add more Levy squads if you wish. But anyway, I like this because the provenances that we have really improve the veterans in our list and give a little bit more courage to our Levy squads. But there's supposed to be a fairly oppressive amount of hopelessness in this setting. And so, like, building a list in which, you don't believe these militia are going to live, it's definitely a change from the kind of list building you might do in other ways, but I believe that it captures the idea or the feel of what the book is going for. Now, I saved one of the most prominent examples from the Heresy lore for last. It doesn't mean it's the worst, it doesn't mean it's the best. You don't really know what it is, actually, because it's the Alpha Legion. We are going with the Geno 5-2 as represented in Legion, Book 8 of the Horus Heresy novel series. Man, I remember when that book first came out, and it was really interesting to see such a twist or change from what was sort of the established Horus Heresy lore, giving the Alpha Legion such a unique look at what the war was going to be like and how the whole thing should fit together. And it was also really cool, I thought, to pair it with the Geno 5-2 and have them be characters that could provide reactions for the audience to map our disbelief, whatever, onto. So I really liked that inclusion, so I had to write a list. This one was sort of interesting. I'm not actually as familiar with the Alpha Legion as I am with some of the other rule sets, and so I asked a couple people for some help, and this list actually comes from Jacob from the Accountabilibuddies. We both were writing lists. I wrote one for Coils of the Hydra, but he went ahead and went with the Headhunter Rite of War, which is really cool as well. So if you're unfamiliar with some of the things that are, like, some of the relevant bits of information to know about the Alpha Legion and the Geno 5-2, is the Alpha Legion, of course, one of their main things is that they can steal a unit from another Legion and use that unit's data slate, but they don't actually get access to the Legiones Astartes special rule. So they're still Alpha Legion, but they're Alpha Legion Fire Drakes, or Alpha Legion in our case, Suzerains. So I was going mentally through my head, I was trying to think of which were some of my favorite legions that the lore basically establishes that the Alpha Legion copies. And we know that they do it to everybody. But, you know, they very famously infiltrate the Iron Hands. They very famously copy some of the characters from the Iron Hands story that are really interesting. No spoilers. They very famously are involved with some of the Raven Guard. They also copy the Space Wolves or mess with the Space Wolves in certain ways. And also, they end up on Ultramar a little bit. So, we went with the synergy of picking the Suzerains. Suzerains are great close combat units, which this list might not have otherwise per se. They also have a special rule which increases leadership of the militia that's going to be connected with us. So it's going to be even better for the Geno 5-2 that we are bringing along. It is really, really rough that, unfortunately, the Geno 5-2, again, are similar to the last list in that they don't necessarily have provenances that, like, really represent the sort of thing that you're trying to do with them, but there's a couple different ways to play it. Jacob went ahead with the Warrior Elite and Legacy of the Great Crusade, just like I did with the last list, for a lot of the same reasons. I think you can get the Grenadier squads, and so you can have a slightly better access to those units, those little tougher units, which have a little bit more character and importance to them than the standard squads. I also think that you could, for example, if you wanted to do Warrior Elite and the Gene Touched or the Gene Manipulated one, that provenance has a variable goal, which is not like necessarily what you want to see. But on a 2 through 5, you're getting access to special rules such as Night Fighting, Move Through Cover, or Fleet 2. On a 2 through 5, you get one of those. On a 6, you can get all 3 of those, or you can choose instead Stubborn, Adamantium Will, 6+, or Relentless. So, obviously you can't plan on getting the 6, and so you never really want to consider that, but Fleet, Move Through Cover, and Night Vision, I said about all of those in my review of these provenances, link down below, that I think that all of those are pretty great, especially for standard infantry in Militia that you are just hoping to scoot along onto an objective. Night Vision is going to help with bad ballistic skill at nighttime and also with their, potentially, leadership issues. Fleet and Move Through Cover are both good ways to help these units, which Movement 6 is not terrible, but it's not as good as Space Marines, of course. But Fleet 2 or Move Through Cover is going to help both of these units get a little bit faster going through difficult terrain, especially if you're just trying to hug objectives. Now, for his example, he went ahead with a commander with Carapace, 2 squads of Grenadiers with las carbines and flamers, and then 1 heavy las cannon field gun squad and 1 heavy autocannon sentinels, the Malcador with the Gravis las, and the autocannons. And also, he really likes the sentinels here, which is cool. He said 3 autocannon sentinels, Malcador with Gravlas, and all the autocannons you can fit, plus a dozer blade. So, this is a fun list. It's got a little bit of armor. It's got that elite thing. The other thing is that you can position it with near the suzerains if you wish, but you also got some other options from the rest of the Alpha Legion stuff. He went ahead and he picked special characters for this, which is cool too. So he picked Dynat, Exodus, and a Saboteur. He picked a detachment of apothecaries, 4 of them, 1 of them with artificer armor, 3 with daggers. Of the suzerains, there are 10 of them. 3 of them have the hammers as opposed to the cool axes. He also went with 10 of the Ifrit squad, which is sort of a specialized recon squad. They all have daggers. 2 of them have nemesis bolters, and the sergeant gets a power axe. He also has 2 contemptors with Gravis Multi-Melta and a Palm Melta, which is a really simple and safe choice, which makes a lot of sense. Then he has 2 10-man hunter squads with Multi-Meltas, and 2 times 10 of the Inductii squads with Vox scanners. So one thing that's really cool about this list and this Rite of War is that, and I'll link this one below as well, the Inductii squads for the Alpha Legion I think are really quite excellent. They have an ability that says basically they cannot be targeted the first round of shooting. So you get to take a free move, scoot them along, and get them onto objectives if you so wish. The biggest problem is that the Inductii squads have the support squad rule as well. So if you want to take 2 of these squads, you're still forced to take something like a tactical squads or, assault squads to match your compulsories. However, in this Rite of War, the headhunters, which you kind of want to take anyway just for fun, those get to be troop choices as well, and because they don't have the support squad baked in, they can be your compulsory troops. You don't then have to take an extra tax of tactical marines just to get the special Inductii squads, which is then just really cool. Also, I just like Rites of War in which there's troop manipulation, and you get something different for your troop. I think that makes the feel of the army feel right, and so anytime I see that happen, I'm really glad when you get 1 or 2 of those units represented as troops, because then it really makes it feel like you're doing the thing that you're trying to do. On top of that, he has 2 javelins with Melta guns, the Multi-Melta and the Las Cannon, so there's a little bit more anti-tank in here. Overall, a fair amount of anti-tank, quite a lot of bodies. You're going to get to move around the board a little bit, and this is a pretty big list. It comes up to 3480 points, according to Jacob, so clap for Jacob here. Well done, Jacob. Like I said, the biggest thing with all 4 of these lists for me is the fact that I think that the militia list is a good example of what I would like to see as far as rules support, direct rules support from Games Workshop. I don't think there's a lot in this book that is really broken. There's some things that are quite good, but nothing that is absolutely like pants on head nuts. I do think there's tons of customization, and there's lots of customization options that aren't necessarily going to harm you for choosing them, so you don't feel like you need to be penalized in that regard, and you get to have some really unique and special flavor. Also, just the fact that we have like a true swarm army here with the inclusion of the Levy squads really allows you to change the tone and the timbre of your games, especially if you're doing something like this, which is bringing them as an allied choice. Now, I know that there are all sorts of militia players who really want to be playing them as the main force, and I do think that there's still options out there for that, but I really like the fact that you can add an allied detachment for relatively cheap and get some of that perspective on the field, which is what I think I've tried to accomplish here today. I think that all 4 of these examples are really fun examples of things that occur in the book, and a good example of the kind of thing that I really like to push for when I am encouraging people to play Horus Heresy, to think about the story, think about how it's going to come about. And if you want to, use these rules, these very mutable, very customizable rules to make your own unique story based upon something you want to make up, right? There's tons of options just for the militia that I didn't even cover here. I think I would definitely include the Caliban Jaegers. Basically, the PDF force of Caliban would be a really great thing to explore here. I think that could be done with a lot of different variations. Armory of Old Knight comes as one. There's plenty of other choices out there if you so wish. And I hope you do. I hope you do wish, because I think providing more variety and including some of this stuff, even if it's just on the allied scale, is a great way to add extra variety and story to our game. Well, I'd love to hear what you think about this. If you have other suggestions for lore building rules like this, I think it'd be kind of fun to make lists, make more lists based upon specific moments in the Horus Heresy. So if you like what you've listened to so far, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, supporting the channel through a tip if you wish, and I hope to see you back here with more very, very soon. Take care.